Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, on behalf of the organizers of the Second European Conference on Border Management, namely Austria, Lithuania, Poland and Greece, allow me to welcome you to Athens. 13 months after the Vilnius Conference, the issue of border protection has been raised in importance within the European institutions, making this conference even more timely. Dear colleagues, it has been an honor to serve as a member of Council for 3 years in the JHA formation. Together, we have discussed time and time again the challenge of migration. It is clear that a new pact on migration and asylum is much needed, and is needed urgently. A pact that, in our view, should address 3 challenges. First, limit irregular arrivals in the European Union. This is primary flows, which inevitably produce secondary flows, affecting the entire European family. Second, the pact should provide tangible solidarity among member states. And thirdly, it should provide for legal pathways, both for humanitarian and work-related purposes. Dear colleagues, in the same hotel 2 years ago, Cyprus, Italy, Malta, Spain and Greece formed the Med5 group to ensure a fair balance between responsibility and solidarity in our migration and asylum management system. A crisis-resilient system can only mean a balanced system. This is the lesson we learned post-2015 at the peak of the migration crisis. First reception countries are entitled to tangible solidarity in the face of continued pressure. But clearly, that angle, the angle of solidarity, must be seen in conjunction with the level of responsibility for each member state. Now, this level of responsibility cannot be seen in isolation from the level of irregular flows. And this is the aim of this conference. How do we reduce the level of irregular flows to the European Union? Nowadays, we're witnessing a constant increase in the number of irregular migrants arriving in the European Union. We're witnessing the efforts of third countries to instrumentalize migration. It is, at this point, crucial for Europe to decide what type of migration policy we want, and more specifically, what type of border management we need to achieve our goal. Clearly, we need to offer asylum to people in need of protection, but in an orderly way, as we did in the case of Ukraine, following the unprovoked attack by the Russian Federation, providing for a common European protection space. What some of us did with Afghan evacuees following the seizure of power by the Taliban. Today, unfortunately, instead of being proactive in asylum management, it is the people smugglers that sell places in our societies. Not to those most in need, but to those that pay their fees. We need to open up legal and safe pathways, but we need at the same time to stop smuggling networks. We need to stop irregular flows to the European Union. Flows that almost always come to Europe through transit countries and not direct from places of risk as defined in the Geneva Convention. Some argued that there is a so-called unconditional right of third country nationals to access the territory of the European Union. But such a right does not exist in international or European law, and certainly does not exist in the Geneva Convention. And also European law specifically provides for safe third countries and the legal consequences that arise from such determination. It's worth noting that the Geneva Convention also places obligations to asylum seekers to abide with. Obligations that many times are forgotten in the public debate. Irregular arrivals at the border is not a new phenomenon. What is new is the level of arrivals since 2015 especially. What is new for Europe is the instrumentalization of migration, as we witnessed in Evros, from Belarus, or in the case of Melilla. Our border policy the European Union border policy, Frontex must acknowledge and respond to these challenges. We need to enhance border protection and surveillance infrastructure. And in our view, in the view of Greece and the organizers, that should include fences when required. A position that 16 member states supported last year with the Vilnius Declaration. Obviously, any failure to secure the external border erodes the freedom of movement within the Schengen area. And this is an area of concern for many member states. Protecting the external border needs to focus on dismantling smuggling networks. In this context, I would like also to refer to the role of some NGOs. We fully support, let me be clear, the role of non-government organizations in providing assistance and services to migrants present in the country, present in the European Union. Our ministry has long-standing relations with international and national NGOs active in social work, interpretation, provision of services to unaccompanied minors, and we work very successfully with them. But we do oppose the involvement of some, very few, in assisting irregular border crossing, especially when such activities are undertaken parallel to smuggling networks. There is a very fine line, but a bright line in these rare cases. And in these cases, justice has to step in and investigate. Another key related aspect we need to tackle is our return policy. The European Union needs to place its weight collectively behind implementing returns. A low level of returns of those not entitled to protection undermines the credibility of the European asylum system and, more generally, the logic of the Geneva Convention. We welcome the appointment of a returns coordinator. This is clearly a positive step. So it is the call by the President of the Commission to open the discussion of mutual recognition of return decisions to facilitate the return of those not entitled to international protection. But also very important, we need to align our legislation with the aim of implementing return in the cases that protection is not deemed necessary according to European law. We needed to consider issues such as the right of migrants with rejected asylum application to file unlimited subsequent application in order to block returns. Of course, implementing returns means implementing our existing readmission and return agreements and arrangements with countries of origin and countries of transit, like, for example, the EU-Turkey joint statement of 2016. And note that since March 2020, Turkey refuses to accept returns. We need to use all conditionalities and leverage tools, including visa-related measures, to achieve a higher return rate. Obviously, stemming irregular crossing of the external borders means less secondary movements. A point that divides us needs to come to a point that unites us, the need of protecting our external borders from irregular arrivals to stop both primary and secondary flows. Finally, preventing a crisis constantly requires adequate funding. We need to secure funding, but also flexibility in funding rules. For example, key is operating expenses to provide for services to asylum seekers, to strengthen our first reception and asylum services. Dear colleagues, today and tomorrow, we have the opportunity to discuss a shared vision on border management, as well as the proposed declaration drafted by the organizers and circulated to all member states participating in today's conference. A declaration following from the declaration signed by 16 member states in 2022 at the first European Border Conference in Vilnius, Lithuania. In recognition of the success of that first conference, Agne, allow me in the future to refer to this European Border Management Conference as the Vilnius process. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being in Athens. And I give the floor to the Vice President of the European Commission, Margaritis Kinas, for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, first of all, let me thank Gerhard, Agnes, Bartos, and Notis for hosting this conference and for extending the invitation to the European Commission and to the EU agencies. And although the organizers have somehow detached our table from the rest, let me start by saying that this is purely situational. We are with you on that side. I want to leave this very clear from the beginning, that the situational arrangements do not reflect what we think of this conference. And this conference, of course, comes at a very timely moment, following the leaders' discussion in the European Council in February on the same topic. I think it was very telling that our political leaders, heads of state and government, agreed very quickly and solidly on the migration chapter of the European Council conclusions, more than on the economy. This also says something, and I think it's a positive sign for all of us here present. The European Council clearly recognized that migration is a European challenge that requires a European response. This is the right, and this is the only approach. Only a European approach made it possible in the last 3 years to defeat the hybrid attacks against Europe and the instrumentalization of human suffering, first in the Greek-Turkish border in Evros, then in the icy forest between Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and in Ceuta and Melilla. Because we were together and because we were able to act as Europeans, we managed to cope with these unprecedented situations. And let me assure everybody that we are now prepared. We now know, and we're now ready to cope with any similar situation that may emerge in the future. Also, only a European collective response made it possible to reach this unprecedented, historic decision of welcoming through a blanket temporary protection status the millions of Ukrainian refugees fleeing Putin's bombs just 1 year to date. And only a European approach will allow us in the future to manage migration properly. The lesson learned of these 3 years and a half in the current political cycle of the European Union is very clear and very simple. We need to act together. And as proposed by the Commission, our heads of state and government agreed that our future action on migration and asylum policy needs to follow 2 tracks, 2 work streams. First, a legislative track, and then an operational track. Let me start with a legislative track. Only a comprehensive, global, holistic review of our legislative framework can offer a strong and sustainable foundation for EU action anchored in EU law, fully enforceable and controllable by the EU. And the new pact is precisely meant to produce this sea change. We need a clear framework and rules of solidarity and responsibility. And the pact remains our #1 priority. And we all have to remain fully committed to finishing the negotiations before the end of this mandate, February 2024. We are not far from the final agreement. And I believe that we continue with the same momentum we have had until now. If we keep this momentum, we can make it. Now is, of course, the time to fine-tune some of the new ideas that have been emerging in recent weeks, looking at how we can ensure things like the border procedure, that we have enough flexibility inbuilt so that frontline member states are only being asked to do what their capacities allow them to do. And for me, it's clear that whatever we do, the same balanced approach outlined for the solidarity mechanism must be followed for its possibility and the border procedures. And we count on all of you but also on our Swedish and our Spanish friends to meet these challenges. If this is necessary, our Belgian friends are there to finish the job. But let me finish my remarks on the legislative draft with a more political remark that comes to, I think, very appropriately to this meeting of ministers. I very much hope, desire, and will strive for this final agreement on the pact to emerge from the Justice and Home Affairs Council of Ministers. This is your job. This is a big moment for Justice and Home Affairs ministers to produce, at the end of a series of failures, the big European agreement that people would link to a European success and that would also have an impact on the European elections of May 2024. It will be a mistake, in my humble view, to push the final agreement up. It happens many times. But it will be a huge success if we can do it in a meeting of Justice and Home Affairs ministers. Let me now quickly come to the operational track. When a few days before the European Council, we framed the discussion by a letter with President von der Leyen to the leaders on the challenges and the operational measures that we need to prioritize in the short term before the pact agreement emerges. And we are now working to make sure that in the next European Council of March, we follow up to all these operational measures effectively. Let me start with borders. And let me be absolutely crystal clear on borders. There will be no European migration and asylum policy without strong, effective border management of our external frontiers. External borders are not national borders. They are truly European borders. And we must strengthen them, and we must do everything to prevent illegal migration. We are ready to increase the presence of Frontex. We proved with our action on the ground in the Western Balkans through agreements with our partners. We are now working with member states to develop pilot schemes that showcase good practices on border procedures, acting as a precursor to the new pact. And this is now a unique opportunity for us to prove what does and what does not work in practice on the ground. We must also focus on another important chapter, equally discussed by leaders, which is enhancing the functioning of our external borders by fully implementing the advanced external border management that we already have agreed upon. And this entails the IT architecture on the European external borders. And we also need to have the courage and assume that financing border management will be a major European priority. It will be you, member states, that are best positioned to define how you protect your borders. And any method of border management needs to be part of an integrated approach. One single element will not do the job, will not solve the issues. We need a chain of measures on border management. An entire border management architecture needs to be put in place. And for all this, you can rely on different sources of funding, EU funds, Frontex support, national budgets, bilateral contributions. And I'm sure you would all have noticed the key word included in the European Council conclusions that also makes infrastructure eligible for EU funding. Let me now quickly come to solidarity. We need to be prepared for the summer season and ensure that we have sufficient pledges in the voluntary solidarity mechanism. frontline member states need to be given the assurance, the certainty, that the voluntary solidarity mechanism will deliver both in terms of relocation pledges and financial contributions. We cannot afford a situation in the summer where we have a voluntary solidarity mechanism which exists in theory, but is not backed by effective pledges and support. And finally, border management and return procedures. We need to do better on returns. We need a common European approach. The current return rate of just 20% across the EU, and that only 16% of return decisions implemented, are unacceptable. We need to make use of the tools we already have. Frontex is our returns agency par excellence, but much depends also on the logistical, technical obstacles that exist at national level. We need to have a cultural shift in the way we carry out returns. National and EU efforts need to complement and support one another. And it's now time that member states apply the mutual recognition of return decisions as asked by the European Council. A return decision taken by one member state must be valid in all member states. And as of next month, when the Schengen Information System enters into operation, this will be a key tool to accelerate and facilitate the procedure. And before March, the Commission will present a new recommendation to support member states in making use of these possibilities, including the use of safe country concepts. Last issue of the operational track is working with third countries. We will not manage migration properly without increased partnerships with countries of origin and transit. And I say this not as a political objective, but I say this as a practitioner, as someone who has repeatedly dirtied my shoes and my boots engaging in migration diplomacy, stopping the flights into Belarus, talking to Turkey, talking to our neighbors. We need to activate a Team Europe approach on external aspects of migration. This is not only for us in Brussels. This is for us and you together, and entails strong, continued, ruthless fight against smugglers, returns and readmissions, but also bringing third countries at a level of cooperation that would allow them to work with us on talent partnerships, on legal pathways, on Erasmus scholarships, on trade preferences and investment. Especially in the central Mediterranean, we are ready to strengthen border management and search and rescue capacities in Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt, working always in close cooperation with UNHCR and IOM. And in the next few weeks, my colleagues and I will visit a number of priority countries of origin and transit, precisely to step up our engagement ahead of the European Council. We all know that when we discuss relations with third countries, our member states have often competing priorities. But each of our foreign policy decisions, each of our diplomatic priorities must also be systematically checked and woven against our migration management objectives. It will never work if we have an EU approach to third countries on migration, combining the right mix of carrots and sticks, and then we have a wave of bilateral member states approaches that engage with these same countries on totally different and irrelevant aspects, excluding migration. So, this is a message that I'm pretty sure everybody in this room shares. But let me ask you to take this message back when you go to your capitals and talk to your prime ministers, talk to your foreign affairs ministers, talk to your development ministers, and tell them that each time that they engage with a third country of origin and transit, migration has to come in. And if we ignore this, we basically will not make it. So, let me conclude thanking again the organizers. This is the second conference, but I see the dynamism and the vibes around the table. Okay, I'm detached from the table, but already I can still feel it. I can pledge that the Commission will continue to support the organizers and all of you in this emphasis on border management. You can count on us to continue putting these operational key actions in practice, and I'm looking forward to your interventions and to your views. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Margaritis, for your kind contribution. I thank the members of the press for covering these two initial opening remarks. If I can just do some quick housekeeping notes. First of all, dinner is about to be served any second now, so we're all desperately starving, so I hope it's quick. We propose that we have a single tour de table in both days, so people that will intervene today will not intervene tomorrow. I suggest that we start with Austria, Lithuania, and Poland with their initial interventions, and then we open the floor to countries that would like to intervene either today or tomorrow. We envisage to finish dinner by 10 o'clock. Then 10 minutes after the dinner, there will be some minivans at the entrance of the Navsika Hotel for heads of delegation that will participate in the Coast Guard night mission. So I hope